Okay, I think that's everybody. I'm hoping that Carol will come back again. She seems to have momentarily left us, I'm sure. So what I am going to do is I'm going to cover a few of the main topics that people have raised in the past around some of these issues, and talk about some of the tools and things that are out there that are available to people, and to signpost you to some places where you can get some more information. So hopefully this will give a good overview of how to of where to start, and this will hopefully get the ball rolling, because I think one of the things that I've certainly found in my own life, in my own professional life and in my personal life, is that actually getting people just to talk and think about some of the issues around this can be quite difficult, and sometimes it's just actually starting the conversation can be actually quite a difficult thing to do. So now we'll start off, and I'm going to share my screen again. So firstly, just to Carol, who asked, is there such a person as a later life planner, and is there a course or something like that? Well, there are more and more people are setting themselves up as later life planners. There are a lot of people who do later life planning, but they do focus on it very much from a financial point of view. And I think one of the things that there's been a lot of research being done over the last couple of years, particularly around how to get more people to plan for later life, because the government is very, very keen that more people do plan for their later life. They're very, very keen to get more people to think proactively about, we're all living an awful lot longer than we did before, we're all retired an awful lot longer than we were before, so what should we do about planning for our later life? How can we make the best of our retirement years? So there's been a lot of work being done that's been done over the last couple of years about how can we make this happen, and so there's a definite move away as well from it being just thinking about it purely in a financial terms. So, you know, have I got enough money? You know, do I have a pension? You know, do I have enough savings? What am I going to do? So there's a definite move to think about it in a much broader way, which I think is a really good thing, rather than just thinking purely in monetary terms. So obviously the monetary side of it is very important. Now, in terms of later life planning for people who are aging without children, there are some slight differences for people who are aging without children. One of the most obvious ones is that there isn't an obvious person to act as an advocate or as a power of attorney, because the vast majority of people will appoint a family member as their power of attorney, or will have a family member able to advocate for them. So that's one of the key things. Getting low-level practical help can be harder to access. One of the things that comes up quite a lot in relation to what happens if people lose capacity through something like dementia is, who's going to tell people about me? You know, who's going to, once I start, if I start having to go into hospital, or if I need to go into a care home, who's going to tell people about me? You know, who's going to know if I'm not able to communicate that myself? We know that people over 75 are generally more likely not to be online anyway. But what we found out during the pandemic is that people who don't have children, particularly older people who don't have children, are even less likely to be online than other older people. So again, that can be, because so many resources are online, that can make things more difficult. And something that people also bring up with me a lot is, what kind of legacy will I leave? From what will happen to my things that I care deeply about, to some more existential feelings about, well, will anybody have known I was here, sort of thing. So there's lots of different things that come up for people when they start to think about planning for later life. So what I'm going to talk about particularly this afternoon is some things around advocacy, some things around power of attorney, which I know you'd obviously asked about, particularly Roger, a bit about advanced decision making, and a little bit about housing, and I'll touch briefly on the other two as well. So the issue around advocacy and who's there to speak for me is, as I said, is something that comes up a lot, and it comes up a lot also in relation to things like next of kin. People who are like, who could be my next of kin? So in terms of advocacy, you can nominate anyone you like to act as your advocate. So if you have a friend, someone you trust very much, who isn't, they don't have to be a relative, so you can say, you know, this is my cousin, this is my next door neighbor, this is my best friend, you know, they are here to help me, they are here to advocate on my behalf, and that is fine. That is absolutely fine. You can do that. Obviously, if you're thinking of doing that, it does help to have that conversation with people in advance. And with all of this, having conversations in advance is a really important part of it. But you can nominate anyone you like. There is actually a legal right to advocacy under the Care Act 2014. If you approach the local authority for help and support, then the local authority will need to think about, are you actually capable of being involved? And do you have someone who's able to support you if you're not capable of being involved yourself? If the local authority believes that to be the case, then they must appoint an independent advocate for you. Now, this is something that not a lot of people tend to know about. It's not something that's particularly widely publicised. One of the reasons for that, of course, is that finding advocacy can be quite difficult. Though I have to say, in Devon, you do have the Devon Advocacy Consortium, which provides advocacy for adults over the age of 18, and is available for you to contact. So there is an advocacy project in Devon. But if the local authority feels that you as an individual, if you're going through an assessment of your own needs, if you're going through a carer's assessment, if a support plan is being prepared for you, or your support plan is being reviewed, and if the local authority feels that you're not able to fully participate in that, then they must appoint an advocate for you. There's also a right to advocacy under the Mental Health Act as well. So for people who have mental health problems, whether that's something like schizophrenia or whether that's something like dementia, again, if there's nobody to act on someone's behalf, then the local authority or the hospital must appoint someone to act as an advocate. So it's not a question of people just sort of like being left alone to kind of get on with it. There is a definite process in place that says we will appoint somebody to make sure that you're going to be okay and your voice is going to be heard through all of this process. Power of attorney. Your power of attorney is effectively, a power of attorney is when you give the power to somebody else to make decisions on your behalf, either because you're no longer able to make decisions or you may no longer want to make decisions. And they can be given either temporarily or they can be given permanently. So you may give someone power of attorney temporarily because you're going to be in hospital having an operation, and that's going to leave you very incapacitated for some time. And you might think, I actually don't want to have to deal with these things for a short period of time, and therefore I'm going to appoint someone else to act as my attorney in that time. And then once that is done, you can take it back. Alternatively, if, for example, someone has dementia, then a power of attorney will last for a lot longer than that. So there's three types of power of attorneys. The ordinary power of attorney, which only covers financial affairs and is only valid while you still have mental capacity. So when I was talking about you might want to appoint somebody temporarily to act on your behalf, this is the one that you would have. And then there's the lasting power of attorneys, and I will go on to those in more detail on the next slide. But effectively, they are primarily if you are worried that you're going to lose the ability to make decisions for yourself, or you have lost the ability to make decisions for yourself. You want to set up a lasting power of attorney. You'll need to set that up in advance, and then once you lose capacity, then the lasting power of attorney would kick in. And then the final thing is the enduring power of attorneys, which are older documents which people may have signed before 2007, and they still would come into effect if people lose mental capacity. And people may have set those up, 20 years ago, but they would still be valid. So for the lasting power of attorneys, there's two types. One that covers financial affairs. So as you can see there, things like buying and selling a house, paying bills, arranging repairs to properties, investing money, pretty much anything that you would do for yourself financially, a financial lasting power of attorney will cover. Now you can limit what people can do with a lasting power of attorney, so you don't have to say, oh yes, you can do all of these things. You can say you can pay my bills and you can invest money, you can make sure the mortgage is paid, but I don't want you to have the power to buy and sell my property, for example. You could say, no, I don't want you to do that. An important thing with the financial power of attorney is that separate accounts must be kept of what the attorney is doing on your behalf, and that must be separate from their own accounts as well, because they will be answerable to the Office of the Public Guardian to make sure that that they're actually not defrauding you effectively. So that people come along and say, okay, so what have you been doing with this money? Where are the receipts? Where are the accounts? How do we know that you spent this money wisely, spent this money in the way that the person would have wanted? And then the other type of lasting power of attorney is one that covers health and care, and can only be used once someone has lost mental capacity. And that will be to decide things about where you live, what your kind of medical care you should have, what kind of contact you have with people, what social activities you participate in, what treatment you might have. So we're primarily talking about people who, the kind of classic example this would be used is if someone was going to go into a care home. So this would be from the whole process of helping to, deciding which care home someone would be in, if they didn't have the capacity to decide for themselves, to think about, what kind of, once they were in the care home, what kind of activities and things they would do, who would be allowed to come in and see them. The lasting power of attorney would look at things like advanced decision making, living wills. So it's a pretty substantial amount of power that people hold power of attorneys have, which is obviously why it's such an important document to set up, because you must set it up when people have capacity. Once someone's lost the capacity to set up a power of attorney, then you have to go through a much longer process through the Court of Protection. So it's always better to set them up in advance. To be totally honest, I think everybody should just have a power, appoint someone in as a power of attorney pretty early on in your life, because you just never know what's around the corner. And with all of this, it's far better to be prepared and far better to plan than it is to have to react in a crisis.
Can I ask a question, please?
Yeah.
Who would it be? Because for people who don't have children, then? Have you said that? I'm sorry if you've covered that.
With a power of attorney, if you don't have children, I mean, you can nominate anyone you like to be your power of attorney, so anyone at all. So you can nominate friends, you can nominate a relative from wider afield, or you can nominate someone like a solicitor. But it is something, it is one of those questions, that is a question that's getting asked increasingly. In fact, it gets asked every time I've talked about power of attorneys. And I think there's a growing understanding that that isn't necessarily an okay answer, in terms of, oh, well, you know, surely you've got a friend, or surely you could find a solicitor then. There's a growing understanding that there perhaps needs to be a role that's created of people who take on this position.
Because you would think it would want to be somebody that you felt you could trust. And if you didn't have a relative, close relative or friends, then, well, I suppose somebody legal you could, but yeah, I can understand why that's being asked.
I think it's one of those things as well. It's fine. I mean, you know, having had this conversation with a number of people, is like it's fine when your friends are all around, because generally speaking, our friends are the same age as we are, more or less. You know, we're all in a sort of very similar age range, and so while I might be more than happy to act as power of attorney to my best friend who doesn't have children, and for her to act as power of attorney to me, whether we're both going to be so keen on that when we're in our 80s is another thing altogether. And I think there's a growing recognition that there needs to be something between friend and solicitor, someone who's trusted, someone who knows you, someone who understands your wishes, and who would do what you want and has a more personal relationship with you. Now, I don't know, there's been I've certainly had several conversations with organisations where we sort of sat there and scratched our heads and go, how we can, you know, we really need something like that, but we don't yet know what that looks like. But there's certainly a feeling that we need to create this kind of different sort of role that we don't yet have. So does that help?
Yes, thank you. And can I just say, I had terrible technical issues trying to get on board, which is why I'm late, so I do apologise for that.
No problem at all. I think it's been lots of technical issues today, so you're definitely not the only one.
Thank you.
So yeah, I mean, Carol saying here in the chat that she's power of attorney for one of her clients, and Jill, who's given a joint power of attorney, which again is another way of doing things, which is quite a good balance of kind of, you've got two people who should be acting in concert with each other and talking to each other, to make sure that your wishes are followed. But yes, it's a tricky one, and I think it's one of those things as well, that as the demographics have changed and as people are living longer, as power of attorneys are becoming more common, and as families have changed, I think there's a much greater understanding now of that we kind of need to do something a bit better than this at the moment. So advanced decision making, which is sometimes referred to as a living will. Again, this is something that people worry about quite a lot. It's obviously come up a lot during the pandemic. You know, what kind of decision making can I make in advance to make sure that I am treated or not how I would like to be? And so an advanced decision making, a living will allows you to do that. It allows you to write down what you would like to happen with your treatment if you're unable to communicate that for yourself, or if you're unable to make that decision for yourself. Now, there are there are certain requirements that living wills have to meet, but generally speaking, they are legally binding, and shouldn't be ignored. And there are pro formas of how to do them, which I will send out. I said to those who came in a bit late that along with the slides from today, I will also be sending out some of the documents and forms and templates that I'm referring to. So you'll be able to have a look at those and hopefully complete some of them. But again, this has kind of come up quite a lot in the pandemic, where care homes have been asked to get residents to decide whether they want to have treatment or not, should they get COVID. And so there's been a lot of controversy about how that's been communicated to people and what discussions people have been able to have, bearing in mind that lots of people, even people with families in care homes, haven't really been able to see them very much. So again, this is something that's come up more, and I believe there's going to be an inquiry into the whole process of advanced decision making and how binding it is and what's done with the information because of the pandemic and what has come out of that. But again, this is the classic thing of like, do not, people who do not want to be resuscitated or do not want to have invasive treatments. So for example, when my mother-in-law was dying, she had of brain cancer, she was unconscious, she collapsed and was unconscious. She'd already told my husband that she did not want to have any more invasive tests or treatments. Now she was obviously unconscious and couldn't communicate that. She didn't have a living will. She had told my husband, and so he said, no, you can't do that because that's not what she wants. But it would have been much more helpful after lots of wrangling with the hospital if we'd have been able to produce it and say, it's here it is, this is what she said she wanted. Now, housing is something that also comes up a lot, and I hope you don't mind, Carol, if I might in a minute ask you to talk a bit about what you do, because it is all part of the of thinking about housing. So with housing, there's lots of issues around housing, one of the key ones is whether people stay put or whether they move. One of the things that you'll know living in Devon is that lots of people decide to move to places like Devon. They're like, I've always wanted to retire to the beautiful countryside, I've always wanted to retire to the sea, and so people move, and people up and move down to Devon, sometimes from quite a long way away, leaving behind a lot of the connections and a lot of the social networks that they have, and they may not always be able to build those back up again. But on the other hand, for some people, moving is absolutely the right thing to do. People move, they can move where they live just to be in a smaller house, or they can move to where there's other sources of support that they want. Equally, some people are like, no, I don't want to move. I've got my house, I love it here, I've got my friends, I've got everything I know is here, I want to stay put. So with that, it's a question of thinking about, how do I adapt my house? What can I do to my house to make it livable in? Should I start to have difficulties getting around, and being mobile within my house? What can I actually do? What changes can I make? The Centre for Ageing Better has been doing a big piece of work around this, about most people want to stay in the house that they've lived in for their life. Most people want to stay in the area that they know, but most people don't make adaptations to their houses until they get to a point where they've got no other choice. And again, like we were saying earlier, doing it in advance is much better than having to do it in a crisis. So, fairly classic things, taking out baths and replacing them with showers, There's my next door neighbour who's retired, has just had her bathtub taken out and replaced with a walk-in shower, because that makes it much easier for her. Putting in handles around stairs, knocking out, if you can, sort of like leveling off floors. There's lots and lots of things that can be done. And again, it's much better to think of that in advance, so that you're not doing as we were for when my nan had a stroke and went home to her very steep staired terrace house, where we were pulling things up and down the stairs on a pulley that we'd kind of rigged up ourselves, because there was no other way to get things up and down the stairs, because she couldn't come downstairs once she was up there. And so she couldn't get anything down the stairs, and it was all very, very complicated. So it would have been far easier if we'd have been able to think about that in advance. Downsizing, or right sizing as it's sometimes called, where people stay within the area that they know but move to a smaller house. And I'm going to ask Carol in a minute to talk about what they do, because I think that's part of what you do, isn't it, Carol? That's what you help people with. Do you want to say a bit about what you do? Take you off mute. There you go.
So I think you've said everything that I do, really, in that where you're coming from is exactly that. People, huge elderly population in Devon that have moved there to retire without family around. And so our job, because I'm an occupational therapist, I also have a lot of experience with adapting properties, which is why I was doing this job. There's two things. I think the main thing is, absolutely right, people want to stay at home. And my view is that sometimes that home isn't the right home. So my job really is to give people information about the decision that they need to make, just to help them make that decision and not feel pressured into having to make a decision because somebody is telling them to, or because they don't know that there might be some other options. So like some people, for example, say to me, I want to move into a home, I want to go into residential care. I'm saying, but you don't have any care needs, and they just feel that things are a bit overwhelming and a bit out of their control. So yes, so our job is either to help people, first of all, our job is to help people plan, and possibly that involves decluttering, getting rid of a lot of the stuff that they have, because that's one of the most overwhelming things people feel, that they've got a house full of stuff and they just don't know what to do with it, and it's all too overwhelming. So the first thing is that we can help people declutter and prepare to move. Also, then we can talk about what type of options they have, like you said about downsizing, or sheltered or retirement living, or home sharing, which is actually that doesn't really go on in Devon that much, but it's such a great idea. And co-housing and shared living, I love the idea of it. I haven't actually come across it yet. So giving people information and then holding their hand from any stage that they want, whether or not, so it's either helping them find a estate agent, a solicitor, or all the way through to actually moving, getting removal people in, and actually helping on the day of moving. Or the other thing that we do is adaptations for people who actually, I must say, the adaptation side is a lot. I thought it would be more, there'd be more people wanting that, but I think that when I'm seeing people, it is a bit too late very often, and they feel that the only solution for them is to move, and I feel sad about that, really, because I just go in thinking, oh, you could have done this, that, and the other. But it's like Kirsty's saying, it's a balance, isn't it? It's whether being in the place you love that actually is suitable for you because you've got the support networks around you. It's great if you can actually make the house work for you. But the other aspect often is that is not viable really for many people, and that downsizing or right sizing will certainly give a better quality of life. And so as an occupational therapist, I've spent many years talking to people about moving and being told it's too overwhelming, I don't have anybody to help me, and I would rather just live in this one room. And I've seen people in terrible situations where their quality of life is so minimal. But if that's a decision that they want to make, that's completely fine, that's their decision. But very often I think if they had been given a bit more information a few years before, that would have been really helpful to them. Sorry, have I gone on now?
No, that's brilliant. That's really comprehensive and incredibly useful, getting it from sort of like the horse's mouth of someone who actually does that. And I think it's so true. A lot of this is if you can get information to people at the right time when it's useful for them. And you know, one of the key things about the adaptations is as you say, getting it to people before they get to the point where the adaptations will no longer make any difference, because it doesn't matter what you do. People feel, even if they could, you make the changes, perhaps they just have lost the confidence in their ability to say, and often it is a confidence thing, isn't it? So yes, there's a real push to kind of say to people, you know, like, you can make changes to your house. I have to say, as someone who's worked on older people's issues since I was 23, I have always lived in bungalows, and I live in a bungalow now because that has always been my plan. But you know, in all seriousness, I have always lived in bungalows because, you know, I will never have to manage, I won't have to manage stairs or anything like that. I'm absolutely fine with that. So thank you, that's really helpful. And there is some information, there is a link to Carol's website on the information that I'll be sending out later as well, so you can go and have a look at what she does in more detail. As Carol touched on, co-housing or shared living, one of the things that people often say to me is, what I'm going to do is, me and a couple of my friends are going to buy a big house and we're going to hire in people who are going to come and look after us. That's what we're going to do. We're not going to go into a care home or anything like that. That's what we're going to do. We're going to buy this big house together, you know, 3 or 4 of us. We'll get carers to come in, we'll get nurses to come in, and that will be brilliant. That's what we're going to do. In fact, people probably say that to me when I start talking about what I do, probably 3 or 4 times a week. That's their plan. But you see, the thing is this country is not awash with groups of older people who live in big houses with carers coming in. So something clearly goes wrong between that's what we're definitely going to do, to it not happening, because it isn't happening. And again, one of the things with that is it is perfectly feasible to do that if you plan it in advance. And one of the things is, I think, is it's a bit of a kind of conversation round, you know, down the pub or after dinner, where yeah, we're going to do that. And then by the time they think, oh God, we really need to do that, the whole thing is so overwhelming that it just becomes too difficult. So again, one of those things is, if people really are really serious about, we're going to buy a big house together with my friends, or, you know, with relatives if I have them, or whatever, is it's perfectly possible to do that. You just need to look into it in advance. And one of the links that I will send around is a blog that was written for us by a solicitor, who talks about what are the things you need to think about if you're going to do that. So, you know, how do you divide up ownership of the property? How do you work out who pays in what happens if people do become too ill and can't stay at home, and how does that work for the rest of the property and everything? So again, but it is something that I think people can definitely do. Again, it just takes a bit of planning. Co-housing is different. Co-housing is much more structured than that. Now, there is, I had a look, and in Devon there are 3 co-housing communities in Devon. There's one in Heartland, Barney Fields Elders in Heartland. There is Bowden House in Totnes, and there is the South Hams Elders Co-housing Community. And co-housing is essentially where you have your own room, your own flat, your own whatever, but you have communal shared areas, so living rooms, kitchens, laundry, garden, and people commit to supporting each other. So there's a commitment, as when you're part of a co-housing community, that you are there as a community and you are there to support each other. And some co-housing communities are only for older people. Some co-housing communities are multi-generational. But it is very much about, this is our community which we jointly own. And so decisions about what happens in the co-housing community are made jointly. There will be regular meetings about how people work out who gets the kitchen when, or do we all cook dinner together. There will be decisions about, you know, do we have, you know, is there a particular rota around when the garden is used or what the garden is used for? You know, do we want to grow vegetables, you know, whatever. I mean, it's a very much a community that you're expected to participate in. So it's not for everyone, but there are some fantastic examples of co-housing around. One of the most well known is the Older Women's Co-housing project in Barnet in North London, and they set theirs up 25 years in the making. They're from campaigning to get that together through to working with organisations to buy the land and to have it all designed by architects and everything. It's fantastic. I mean, it took a while, but there's a blueprint there now for it, which is great. Home share, as Carol touched on, that again is something that's becoming a lot more prominent now. Home share is when you have someone younger come and live with you, and they pay a lower rent than they would normally do if they were renting on their own, and they're expected to provide some support during the week as well. So say 6 to 10 hours of kind of like help and companionship. So not personal care or anything like that. They commit to staying overnight. You know, they commit to kind of being there for a certain amount of time, sort of helping, say, with shopping or with housework or whatever. And it's something that started, probably really took off about 5 or 6 years ago, and there's been an awful lot of work that's been put in, and I know that they've recently expanded into the southwest. So I know that they're kind of starting to do more work in the southwest. So hopefully home share will be coming soon to a town near you or a village near you. And then there is more traditional sheltered or retirement housing. Sheltered housing used to be much more, there would usually be a warden that lived on site. Back when I first started working on older people stuff, a warden lived on site and, you know, was always there if you needed something. That's changed quite a lot, and most places now have mobile wardens, and you kind of summon, you know, if you need help, you kind of pull a bell cord, rather than having someone on site. So there's not as much sheltered housing as there used to be in the past. There's much more retirement, specialist older people's housing being built, because there's a recognition that obviously as the population is aging, as there's a much greater number of older people than there used to be, so there's a lot more retirement housing is being built. So again, people sometimes think, yeah, I want to go, that's, you know, I want to go and live where I know that I'm going to have lots of people who are contemporaries, and I'm going to be able to have kind of like, you know, shared experiences and stuff like that. For other people, they're like, oh God, no, I don't want to live somewhere like that. But, you know, it's whatever people want, but there's an awful lot more of it than there used to be. I'm going to suggest we take a break there for about 10 minutes, because apart from anything else, I need a glass of water, because it's quite hot in my room and I'm getting a bit thirsty. Before I do that, does anybody have any questions on anything I've said so far?
Kirsty, are you going to share the names of those co-housing places?
I can definitely share those. Yep, absolutely.
I got some of it down, Heartland, but I didn't get the name. I got Bowden House, Totnes, and I didn't get the name of the one in South Hams. So
Don't worry, I will share, I will add all that out to on the information that goes out.
I'd like to have a look. Thank you.
No problem. I'll try, if I can find the links for them, I will add those as well.
Brilliant, thanks.
No worries. Okay. Okay, if there are no other questions, should we come back at 3:10?
Sure.
Thank you. Okay, right. I've had a glass of water and now my throat feels considerably better than it did. What I'm going to do now is move on to talk about some of the tools that are out there to help you with some of this, because obviously there's a lot to think about. If we're going to do sort of like a comprehensive plan, there's a lot to think about. So I'm going to share with you some of the things that I've found useful and that other people have found useful, and then touch on some sources of help and more information. So I'm going to share my screen again. So there's a lot of tools which will help you calculate what your retirement income is likely to be. So I've highlighted there which have an online tool that enables you to do that. The Money Advice Service has an online tool that enables you to do that. Legal and General, and indeed any of those kind of Legal and General, Prudential, you know, Aviva, anything, anybody like that, they've nearly all got something on their website which is, you know, put in like your, you know, like your income here, or your predicted, you know, like pensions here, and, you know, like what savings you might have and any investments that you've got, and they will kind of come up with a calculation of you know, how much income you'll have, or some of the things you need to talk about. So it's kind of quite different from when I very first started to look at sort of financial calculations around retirement when I was in my 20s, which involved sitting down for about 3 hours with sort of like a financial planner and doing everything on paper. So there's a lot more, there's a lot of things out there that will help you at least have an idea of where you might stand financially, or where you do stand financially. And then there are planners. There are websites which help you plan on a much bigger scale, and I'll go on to show you a couple of those. But Peace of Mind Planner, the My Wishes, which is a digital platform that records, kind of brings together your will and, you know, power of attorney, and sort of like anything to do with your online password and all of that, brings them together in one place, which you can access. The lovely named Biscuit Tin, which also does the same thing as well, which kind of keeps together kind of like your end of life wishes, can send video messages to people for you at the end of your life and stuff. So there's quite a few. Again, as there's more understanding of people have a need to plan, more and more people are developing products and tools and websites that are making it easier for people to do it. So that's a good thing. And then obviously the advanced decision and power of attorney, which you can download pro formas for and complete them yourself. You know, you may want to get legal advice, but you don't have to, because there are forms out there. You don't actually have to consult a solicitor if you don't feel that you want to do that. So the Peace of Mind Planner is incredibly good because it's incredibly detailed. As you can see here, it covers everything, you know, your personal information, or your legal documents, household practicalities, which is a wonderful section on sort of like, you know, where things are kept. you know, because people don't always know where's the alarm code to turn off the house alarm, where's the stopcock, where's the fuse box. You know, people do not always know that sort of stuff. You know, what am I going to do? What happens to my pet if I go into hospital? Who looks after my pet? What will happen to them? How does somebody access my bank account? You know, what would I like my funeral to be like? Do I want to have any kind of memorial service? I mean, it's just an incredibly detailed, I think it's 100 pages altogether. So it kind of really works you through absolutely everything you could think of. And I personally think it's an incredibly good value document to kind of like look at, and you can download it and work through it. But yes, I say that is a very good. That's probably the most comprehensive one that I've seen that covers everything, absolutely everything. And then My Wishes is an online is a digital thing, where you have your name and your date of birth, and it has all the things about, you know, like your national insurance number and, you know, like your medical, your NHS number, and then it includes things like your will, your advanced care plans, your online, so everything that you do online, all your passwords, all your digital passwords for everything, goodbye messages that you might want to send. It has a bucket list on there, which I like, so people could go on there and see, like, you know, what are the things that you like this that you always wanted to do, so you can share that with other people, and this is completely free, so again, well worth a look at. Even if you don't use this particular tool or some of these particular tools, they just kind of help you think. They just help you think through the issues, and that's because you don't have to have sort of like a planner with a glossy cover or anything like that. As long as you've written it down somewhere, that's fine. You know, if it's just in a notebook, that's fine. And then there are things like This Is Me, which you may have heard of. This Is Me comes from the Alzheimer's Society, and it's designed for when people are unable to communicate, either because they have dementia, which means they can't, or they have something else, which means that they can't communicate, or that they can't remember things. And it's basically a four-page booklet, and you fill in who you know, all about yourself, what jobs you used to do, or, you know, what interests and hobbies you have, what are your favorite things to watch, what things do you like to read. So it's about you as a person, and it can be, you know, given to someone to say, okay, so Kirsty, you know, this is Kirsty, and she spent all her life working in the voluntary sector, and she's actually quite scared of dogs. So, you know, if you're going to bring in a pet, you know, bring in pets to the care home, she might not like it if it's a dog, and she really likes to drink tea, but she's not keen on coffee at all, and she doesn't like to eat this. Yeah, it's just a very useful document to have, so that people can hand that over, because as I touched on earlier, one of the things that comes up a lot when we're talking about aging without children is people's worries about dementia, and what will happen if I don't remember the person that I used to be, and there isn't anybody around to tell people. Who will know who I used to be and how I used to think and live and work and all of that. So This Is Me is very, very good. The Compassion, Dignity in Dying has some really good things on advanced decision making, which again I will send round to you, because I've downloaded those, and I will send those round. And again, that's all about, you know, what treatment do I want or do I not want to have as I get towards the end of life? What kind of end of life do I want to have? So there is, you know, it's become, there are many more useful tools out there than there used to be. for planning for later life, and particularly in terms of making your wishes known in advance, rather than having to rely on other people remembering it for you. Obviously, if you don't have children, and often it is adult children that certainly hospitals or care services will look to, will be like, well, what would your, what do you think your mum or your dad would want? If you don't have anybody like that for them to look to, there can be quite a gap there. And so it's really important that we make sure that that gap isn't there, by preparing as much as we can in advance. From the video that I tried to play earlier that didn't work, the key things that Hella, the solicitor, was saying is, remember, it is better to plan proactively than have to react in a crisis. It's so much better to have all this in place, so that if things, or when things do go wrong, you at least have thought about it all in advance. And it's always good to tell people what you want, but writing it down is really important. And writing it down and then telling people where it is probably the third thing, but the one that kind of people don't always remember. It's like, because you have your planner with all of your key information in, and obviously your instinctive reaction is, God, this has got absolutely everything about me in it. I need to keep it somewhere safe. I don't want someone just being able to kind of walk into my house, pick this up, and like know everything about me. And so what people can do is put it in such a super secret, safe place that nobody knows where it is. So again, it's one of those things. If do put it in a safe place, don't leave it lying on the dining room table where anybody could see it, but equally make sure somebody knows where it is. And one of the suggestions, the best way of doing that is the message in a bottle scheme. I don't know if people know the message in a bottle scheme, where message in a bottle scheme is something that the Lions charity have done most work on. Effectively, it's a bottle that lives in the fridge, and in it has information about you and your medication. But in that, you could also put, and my later life plan is in the top of the wardrobe, underneath the bed, hidden under here, whatever, because it's where paramedics will always look in the fridge for it. So as long as there's somebody who knows where your plan is, that's the most important thing, because you don't want to do all of this work and then not be able to share your plan with anybody, because that would be a bit of a waste of time. Then finally, sources of help. Now there are lots and lots of places to go and get more information. As I said, we'll share more information after this, but AGK Devon has a service where they do power of attorneys and wills. So if you don't have one, they do a scheme with a firm of solicitors to do reduced prices for power of attorney, and solicitors make a donation to the charity. So you can look on the AGK Devon website, and that will give you some information about that. The Devon Advocacy Consortium, which I talked about earlier, and about your right to advocacy under the Care Act and also under the Mental Health Act, if that applies. Devon Advocacy Consortium, go and have a look at that. That will give you more information about, how to get hold of them if you need it, some advice on advocacy and how to get it. So again, very, very good to look at. The Society of Later Life Advisors. This is a group of financial and legal advisors who specialise in later life. And they work on they have a regional basis, and they regularly hold seminars, particularly around issues affecting older people. They put on training for people who want to advise people in later life, and you can go on their website and you can look up who are the specially trained advisors for later life in the Southwest. So you can go on there and look that up, and they're incredibly good. Similarly, solicitors for the elderly. Not such a great name, but again, people who are members of Solicitors for the Elderly, again, are people who've had specific training in advising around later life issues. That can be issues particularly around care, for example, and what happens around paying for care, because that comes up a lot. The website is there, very good to go and have a look at. Again, they put on lots of training within the profession to advise older people. The co-housing co-housing network has a website, so you can go and look at what co-housing is around Devon, but also what co-housing is around the southwest generally, or across the country. If you're thinking about setting up co-housing, that has all the information about all the things that you need to do in order to set that up yourself. The My Wishes, which I showed you earlier, you can go and have a look on there. You can register on that for free. So you can just set up an account and go and have a rummage and a look. The Peace of Mind Planner, which was developed by a woman called Annette Earle, who is a later life coach. So she's got some videos on there as well about how to use the planner and the things to think about. So well worth a look. And Moving Together, Carol's community interest company, which she told you about, which obviously do lots of, which is obviously a fantastic wraparound service looking at all the different things around housing and staying put or moving or whatever. So there's lots of places that you can go and look and get more information around planning for later life. So does anybody have any questions? I can see everybody. So, as I said, what we'll do is we'll send around the slides. I'll send around the video, so hopefully that will play better on your own computers. I'll send around the templates and pro formas that I've downloaded, so you can have a look at those. But yes, I mean, as I say, there's a lot more information out there on planning than there used to be, and a lot more. I think there's a much greater understanding of the need to think about planning in the broadest sense. So hopefully that will have given you some pointers and some signposts of where to go.
I'd love to hear from anyone else on the call, just as to your thoughts on it, whether you've got a question or otherwise. I just aware that I haven't really heard much about your experiences of these topics, or we shared at the beginning a little bit about why you'd come on the call, but just what it's made you think, or what you might do with your next steps. If anyone was willing to share, interested to share. Or not.
I'll pick up Jill's question here, which I think is a really important one. As again, that's something that comes up a lot. In that instance, my first port of call would usually be the main help desk at either Independent Age or Age UK. So to get some kind of like expert advice from them, because it is an extremely complex issue, and kind of harking back to my days as an advice worker. There's a lot of issues around what local authorities will pay, whether a different care home could meet somebody's needs, or whether it would actually whether if moving them would no longer meet their needs, and therefore that would be illegal. It's an extremely complex area. So Age UK or Independent Age, both of them offer may even be a 24-hour helpline, but certainly a 7-day-a-week helpline. And I would start there, and they will then signpost you to people who would be able to act on your behalf locally. So that would be where I would start. And I think if I can, I'll see if I can find a fact sheet on it. Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure that there's a fact sheet on it, so I'll find that and I will send that round as well, because I know it's something that people really worry about.
I saw you you say thank you, Jill. You were muted.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's great.
Yes, it's Carol saying she uses Solar as well. They are good. They are good. But yeah, it's you know, finding someone who's got expertise in that area, because it is it's a complicated area of law, and sort of like, you generally speaking, you would need to be properly trained in later life advice and care costs and all of that in order to, I think, to properly advise people. Otherwise you could get it very badly wrong. But yeah, we'll find you some links for that. But if no one's got any more questions or anything they want to share, then if you have anything else you want to say, Harry?
I was just going to say, as I say, we were hoping to have a few more people today, but the idea being, I know, Kirsty, when you've spoken to us before, or with us before, you've set up some very successful groups in up north somewhere, Yorkshire, Leeds,
York,
Leeds. Yeah,
Bradford.
Yeah, which are sort of dedicated aiding without children social groups almost.
Yeah, they're social groups.
Yeah, and so we have our regular highlights social groups on a Tuesday, which you know, everyone is always welcome to. We'll send out information about those as well. We have you know, activities like all kinds of things. We had Tai Chi the other week and pub quizzes and stuff like that. Generally just a social thing, and you're always welcome. But we were thinking about trying to emulate some of the groups running exclusively for sort of support social groups for people aging without children, because we know we've spoken to people who are sort of feel like they want to be around and talking with people who understand their own situation. So I was wondering if people would be interested in that at all, if any particular day would suit you, and we could maybe set a next meeting for maybe a month's time or something like that. I don't know what people would think.
Would that be aimed at any particular age? I mean, is it aimed at a particular age group, or just aimed at anybody without children?
The groups that for aging without children are aimed at people over the age of 50. That's primarily because there's a lot of groups for women under the age of 50. So there's Gateway Women and there's the Dovecote. And then there's ones that are particularly around infertility or miscarriage or things like that. So whereas the ones for people aging without children, the principal purpose of them is for people to share experience, and to be able to kind of talk openly about some of the concerns and fears that they have about aging without children. To the one in York, which is the one that's probably the one in York is our biggest group, that has 150 people. And obviously they don't all come all the time, but what that does is that meets once a month. They have a meal together, they have a speaker in, and they do sort of various activities together. So they've written a play together, and they've been doing a lot of work around capturing a lot of the stories around the pandemic. So they've done a whole piece of research around the pandemic, and what does it mean to be aging without children during COVID-19 and stuff. So that's primarily, so it's focused on sort of like they're all focused on like later life issues. So that's the purpose of them.
50 plus, really.
Day for Tuesday.
Sure. How about yourself, Kate? Is that the sort of thing you would potentially be interested in joining with us, or did you find today interesting? Oh no, I can't hear you. No. Sure.
Okay.
That's a shame. No problem.
That's right. Well, we can always follow up with more when we email around. We can always follow up with more detail afterwards. Yeah,
Thumbs
we'll
up.
do that.
Universal sign.
I know. Universal sign of Zoom.
Yeah, except for if anyone's ever, sorry, this is a tangent, but I'm going to say it anyway. If you've ever done scuba diving, you'd never ever because it means go up. So it doesn't mean you're okay. It means get up to the surface.
All right. Let me get up there.
You have to do,
but not too quickly.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah,
I
maybe.
I must go. Nice to see everybody.
Thanks,
Nice to see you,
Tessa. Good to see you too.
Thanks. Yeah, maybe we'll put a poll or something, indication of dates or something on that email as well. Doodle poll. Really grand, lovely. Thank you, Kirsty.
No problem.
And I'm starting to realise I should get around to doing things probably. So.
All right then.
Yeah.
Take care, everybody. And thank you ever so much for your time, and we will be in touch.
Bye-bye.
Okay then. Thanks a lot.